Jiddu Krishnamurti was like a thunderbolt from heaven, totally upsetting the established order of so-called spiritual teachers and spiritual traditions. It shouldn't be confused with J. Krishnamurti. J. Krishnamurti is the famous one. Jiddu Krishnamurti knew J. Krishnamurti, and for a while Jiddu was a student of J. Krishnamurti, but in the end he rejected what he had to say. Jiddu was actually raised in India to be a spiritual guru. That was his destiny as far as his parents and his grandparents were concerned. And he was part of the Theosophical Movement. And for 49 years he studied and gave lectures on related topics. And something within him knew that basically most of it was bullshit. But he just didn't have, to use his words, the courage to just throw it all away. And then at the age of 49, after almost driving himself insane with questioning and searching, an event occurred to him. And this came after meeting most of the prominent gurus in India, one of whom said, Jiddu had asked the question, can you give me moksha, or enlightenment, or freedom, or liberation? And it was Ramana who said, I can give it, but you cannot take it. And this sent Jiddu into a tailspin. And eventually, at the age of 49, he had what he described as a devastating realization that he didn't have a mind. Now, this is very similar to the Zen tradition of no mind, no self. And he came to it in his own way. And he came to it in his own way because he was that kind of person. He just wasn't going to buy into any one tradition. He just pushed and pushed and pushed until something happened. And he lost his self, as we would normally call it. And he claimed that our mind is nothing but a collection of ideas that we've inherited from our environment. So, for example, when we say the sky is blue, and this is an example he gave, the idea of blue, the word, is now something that we form in our minds when we look at the sky. We can't just look at the sky. We have this set of ideas associated with it, sky, blue, or if it's cloudy, clouds, whatever the situation might be. In many ways, Jiddu realized what the Zen Buddhists have talked about for centuries, but he did it in a very particular way. He would say to people, I have nothing to give you. There's nothing that I can tell you. And in fact, one of his famous quotes was, you will live in misery and you will die in misery. He was quite a character. You know, I love the man. I've never met him. He died in 2007. But I just love his irreverence. And in fact, one of his claims was that we are all totally unique. And to try and emulate what the Buddha did, or what Jesus did, or what Lao Tzu did, or any of the so-called great spiritual teachers, is to be dishonest to ourselves. Of course, this has manifested recently in thousands, tens of thousands of people trying to jump on board the Gurdjieff train. And having been a member of various Gurdjieff groups, I can say that people become slaves, they lose themselves to it. They lose their own uniqueness. At one of the groups, there was something called the Gurdjieff face, the work face. The work face was essentially a very solemn face where people didn't even acknowledge each other as they passed each other. And in some of the subgroups, people would laugh about this. But overall, this was the way they behaved, because they saw other people behaving like that. And oddly enough, this group was in London. And if you have ever been to London, I guess it's the same in most major cities, people do not acknowledge each other. If you look at someone, they almost take it as a personal insult. That's the way it is in many cities. What UG seem to realize is what the Zen Buddhists call small mind and big mind. Small mind is your ordinary mind. It's full of ideas, concepts, opinions, all that kind of thing. Big mind is essentially the mind of the universe, and please don't interpret that as literally meaning the kind of mind that we've got, but it's much bigger. The mind of the universe is, well, it just is. Not much more you can say about it. And the idea of most traditions that aim towards liberation is that we should somehow be able to move beyond small mind and then embrace big mind. Another thing that UG said was that there's no such thing as liberation, enlightenment, all these things that people go searching for. And there's a number of videos that you can see on YouTube, one of which has somebody saying that they are discontented, and he said that your seeking for contentment is making you discontent. And that's actually the same with most of the things that we go searching for in so-called spiritual traditions. Whatever you go searching for, you will absolutely 100% guaranteed not realize. And it was said to me at various times, your search is the very thing that's stopping you finding what you're looking for. It's one of those sort of beautiful paradoxes that shows us how limited our outlook is and our normal thinking. When UG said that we are unique, what he was saying was that every one of us will have a different way of coming to the point where we are content. And I mentioned in other videos that the word contentment is just such an underrated word, because of course if you're content, then you have no desires. And the Taoist tradition, the whole aim of it to some extent, is to come to the point where you are not with desires. So contentment is a very big thing, very, very big thing. To be without desires is something very, very, very few people achieve. Because most of us are searching. We have in our mind the idea of some kind of attainment. The Zen Buddhists say over and over again when they sit in their meditation that the most impure form of meditation is to sit there thinking that they are trying to achieve something. Of course, the mind finds it very difficult to do anything without the notion of achieving. And in fact, there's a passage in the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna is speaking to Arjuna, and he says, you have the right to perform your prescribed duty, but you are not entitled to the fruits of action. Never consider yourself to be the cause of the results of your activities, and never attach to not doing your duty. In other words, what this is saying is that there is no fruit that you can claim as a result of your actions. I love this kind of thing. It destroys in me, and hopefully in the people who are listening, but at least give them some idea of how mechanistic our minds are, how closed they are, how programmed we are to expect that some course of action will result in some given kind of reward. In fact, UG didn't have a huge number of followers, but he did have, I don't actually know the numbers, I imagine it was probably maybe hundreds, maybe 1,000 or something like that. He travelled around the world. He didn't have a permanent home. He just stayed with people, and they were clearly honoured to have him as their guest. He did initially have some places where he lived, but eventually he didn't. In fact, he died on the couch of some friends that he had in Italy, in their home. In fact, there is a video showing. It's very moving. He's very frail, very weak. He didn't want medical attention. People were around him talking, and at one point he just raises his hand and beckons people to go, and they all left the room, and he died. He was totally composed, totally fearless, and totally at one with the situation, which is just very moving and quite wonderful. Anyway, he pushed away most of the people who followed him. He would always say to them, "There's no point you being here. There's nothing I can give to you." And of course he was very carefully and very lovingly, really, just trying to destroy their notions of gain, of achieving something. He used to refer to the mainstream spiritual teachers as those bastards. He can be fairly abusive, but it all seemed in a fairly light-hearted and quite amusing manner. He was very critical of the mainstream spiritual movements, saw them as nothing more than money-making ventures, and that they were selling something that didn't exist, namely enlightenment, moksha, whatever you want to call it. So in effect, he would push his students away. And in fact, that is a sign of a true teacher. At some point, the teacher has to push the student away, because the student has to find their own way. They are a unique creation, so their way is going to be unique. Anyway, I would recommend that if you want an insight into some of these things, that you should maybe look at some of his videos. And there are numerous books published. The most useful one that I've found is the Jiddu Krishnamurti Reader, which is published by Penguin. Beautiful book, beautiful book. I've got maybe half a dozen books that I constantly go back to, and that is one of them.